Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Long-Term Space Program. I'm your host, Scott Cook, and let's get going here. So in this episode, we're going to hit the moon, we're going to start gathering kethane, and we got a lot of orbital refueling operations to do because we're going to be getting a rather large vehicle going. Alright, so first things first, we've got the kethane rig. It's arrived at the moon. I've got a periapsy. I just need to bring down the apoapsy to circularize the orbit. If you look on the right hand side there, the Kerbal Engineers gives you an idea of where my current orbit is. I prefer to fly from here than I do from the map screen because I like watching my ships. They're cool. I like to watch the animations of the engines flaring. So we're just going to get stabilized the apoapsy here. Just about done. There we go. We got ourselves a nice orbit. Now I'm going to set my probe up to be released so I can start putting it on a polar orbit. I want it to go around the poles so that the rotation of the moon will actually take care of a lot of the surface scanning for me. As the satellite goes around the poles, the moon rotates around its equator. That means every time the probe goes around, there'll be a new section of ground for it to cover and to scan. Figure it's probably the most efficient way to do it. Plus, if I can do it right, then the probe will always have access to sunlight, and therefore I don't have to work. Now, you can see how the new kethane grid system works, as we've just discovered kethane there. That's the green hexagons that you're catching. It's great that I found some right on my orbit, right around the equator of the moon. That makes it easy for me to land my rig and to gather the resources I need and then take off to dock a rendezvous with other craft that are going to be coming to the moon orbit. Anyway, I'm coming up close to the spot where I'm going to be releasing my probe into the orbit. Now it's going to be matching my orbit to begin with here, so I've got to do some thrusting with it on its own engines to get it up to a polar orbit. That is going to take a little bit of effort because of the size of the xenon engines. Their thrust is very limited. So anyways, we get started here. I turn on one engine and I realized my thrust was still up, and I was like, whoops. And then as I was trying to fix it, sticky keys kind of boned me. It wouldn't let me dethrust with one orbit thing. So I'm like, oh god, what do I do? Do what I do? Okay, So I'm kind of panicking. I finally get it to shut off and spend a few minutes getting it under control and getting really annoyed. So I go into the computer and fix that so the ease of access doesn't come back on again here shortly. Or excuse me, the sticky keys, because yeah, I personally hate that stuff. I wish they wouldn't put it in, but apparently they feel it's allows for some ease of access. Anyway, I'll stop ranting about that. Alright, so we've got the probe more or less aligned again. This whole fiasco also kind of screwed up the point at which I was going to begin my thrust, so therefore it kind of got my orbit. I began doing my inclination of my orbit too late. That upset me a little bit, but hey, stuff happens. It makes life interesting, right? So we'll correct it, and even if it's not on a perfect polar orbit, it'll still be more than adequate to do what I need it to do. Anyways, while I was doing my inclination burn here, I've come across something rather interesting. Since both my vehicles are loaded and both my vehicles had kethane scanners on them, I was actually starting to scan twice as much area. As you can see when I get up here, when the orbit separates enough, 2 hexagons, then even 3 hexagons start getting detected all at once, which was kind of sweet. So there might be a way to take advantage of that in the future to scan twice as much area. I'm not exactly sure how just yet, but it's definitely worth checking. As you can see right here, I start getting enough space between them that they both start scanning that much more surface area. And I found another vein of kethane. Awesome! You can always use more gas. More gas for me, thrusters. I'm really happy with how much kethane I found right across the equator, because as we develop this, if I had to start doing a lot of orbital corrections to match up with vehicles, it was going to cost more fuel, and therefore, just generally adds more time to the whole process. Well, I spend a little time scanning here and take advantage of this split vehicle system for as long as I can. Eventually the probe's going to get a little too far away from the rig, and therefore it's going to unload. And as soon as that happens, it stops scanning. It should happen right up here anyway. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the future or the plan for this area. Now, I've got all the windows open for the transfers to the other planets in the system, but they're obviously a fair amount of time away before I'm going to be taking advantage of those. So I'm going to spend the first part of this series, you know, heaven forbid something happens and I can't do it anymore, but, you know, keeping our fingers crossed that's not the case, I'm going to have stations around the moon, station around Minmus, and I'm going to be extracting gas as much as possible just to kind of get prepared to do larger excursions out to other planets. Now, since we're going to be using kethane to refuel our ships when we get to those places, that's going to give me more options for exploration, development, that kind of thing. I'm always open to suggestions. I'm interested in what any of my viewers would have suggest me do. I know that there's other Kerbal Space guys out there who do videos just like these, and they do all kinds of stuff. There's guys that do bases, there's guys that do, you know, single manned excursions, things of that nature. I'm looking for suggestions, so please feel free to drop me a line. Here I'm just picking my landing spot for the rig. I'm going to take advantage of that vein of kethane that's on the light side of the moon right now so I can see what I'm doing. Letting MechJeb do a lot of that kind of stuff just because it helps speed up the whole process, and I want to get more of this out as I can. Beginning our main descent burn here, this is going to take us down to a trajectory that will get us close to the kethane, and I'm hoping and praying that it's not going to be too hilly, craggy, or just too difficult to land on. I don't have a lot of fuel left in this vehicle, and I need to make sure that once I land I'm able to refill it. If it starts rolling or something, it could, you know, basically bone me to begin with here, and I'm kind of not in the mood. So as MechJeb's just lining up the crosshairs to the final approach, we're just gonna watch it here come down. Landing's probably the most difficult thing I've always had trouble with in this game. I have a record of bouncing things off of orbital bodies that don't have any atmosphere to drop parachutes. So I'm kind of glad that MechJeb works fairly well for this. Again, I'm more interested in just getting the logisticals done of this one so that you can just see more orbital construction, more development. As we're coming in here, I can take a look at the surface. It doesn't look too bad. Fingers crossed. Just getting on the final stage of the descent here. So here we're coming down. I can see there's a little bit of an incline, but I actually designed this vehicle to try to put the center of mass as low as possible so that it doesn't want to tip over. As you can see here, I think I did a fairly good job, because even though it hits, it doesn't even bounce or teeter at all. I'm quite happy. So down with the kethane drills. Green smoke, that's always a good sign. So let's just get old Billy Bob out here to have a quick look at the surface. Boom. Good job, man. Your first graceful entrance. Right between the drills, too. Anyway. Let's put a flag down. What do we got here? So this is going to be moonsite landing. I'm kind of eyeballing the area, too, just to see if this would be a good place for my permanent kethane base, but I think it's a little too inclined, so I'll have to look a little harder. Anyway, we found kethane. Now for the snacks. Heading back planet side here, I'm going to get into the vehicle assembly building here, and we're going to launch the next vehicle. Now this is my kethane platform. I'm going to use this to do the extraction and process of the raw kethane into rocket fuel. The top half of it is actually a sky crane that's going to find its home in the moon's orbit, and it's going to be used to ferry loads down to the surface of the moon on a regular basis as I need them. Using a lot of KW rocketry parts on this particular craft because, again, it's a big structure. It's difficult to launch, and that mod is just great for launching large products or large vehicles into space. Now, this vehicle is designed to drain as much fuel from the top section as possible before it separates. This is going to make the structure fairly easy to move around once it's in orbit. The sky crane is actually going to have to do all the hauling to get it out to the moon. It's going to need some fuel before we get there, so I'm going to have my rig that's already up, or my big rig, which is my space truck, that's already at my space station, is going to rendezvous with it once we're in orbit and give it some more fuel so it has more than enough delta V to get down to the moon. Now, even with that, it's only going to have enough fuel in it to get it to the moon and to get a stable circularized orbit. From there, the kethane rig that's already there processing kethane is going to rendezvous with it one more time so that it has enough fuel to land safely. As you can see there, my one booster hit, but it didn't cause any damage, so luckily we keep going forward. These two Kerbals are like looking around, I didn't see it if you didn't see it, and they're like, okay, we'll keep going. Now just talking about the platform itself a little bit here. If you can kind of see, there's some parts on it from KW Rocketry, obviously the gas tanks. It's also got the kethane drills, there's 4 of them. It's got the nuclear reactor to keep it powered again, so I don't have to worry about solar sails or shutting down at night. I've also got the boron arms on every tank. Now, some of you might be asking, well, why would you do that? And the simple answer is, if you remember me explaining in a previous episode that the boron arms can dock to anything that doesn't have a docking port. They basically have a magnetic tip on them that once you get close enough to something you can connect to it, and the game treats it as a dock. Therefore, I can use them as kind of like fuel pipes. One of the vehicles I'm going to be taking to the moon a little bit later is a truck that's going to be just basically fueling or moving fuel around, because I don't want to be landing right beside this thing. It would be very, very tricky to land something close enough to it that it would connect, but yet have very little chance of impact. Just stay tuned, and you'll see how I'm going to pull this off, or at least how I'm got it pulled off in my head. We have yet to see if it's going to work. So now I've dumped those big cans on the bottom. We're going to the upper stage now. Sky Crane is taking over to circularize the orbit. Now, if you notice on the Sky Crane, I've actually flared the engines out again, similar to what I did on my kethane rig that's on the moon right now. Again, I just did that to give it a little bit more of a interesting profile, and just to kind of shoot the jet wash out a little bit, just in case I needed to, because that jet wash can damage components that's right in its way. I don't think I will be needing to drop anything quite as big as this platform, so if I can make sure this works, then I should be gold going forward. I wanted to originally use the big rig to pull the rig out and then send the Sky Crane out separately. However, I ran into too many problems with that. Simply put, the senior docking ports on these are not strong enough to pull this big of a load without the aid of some struts. So I decided to try doing it as one vehicle, and it actually worked out fairly well in some of my tests, so I decided to go with it. Anyway, we got a stable orbit, so I'm just moving back to one of my probes here. Again, this is the one at the moon, trying to get a polar orbit. It's not going to work. I didn't quite get the polar orbit I wanted because of a few technical problems, sticky keys, and a few other things. So I'm going to still get close enough to a polar orbit that it's going to do the job I needed to. It just might not be perfect, and that's fine. I'm not too worried because, again, I've got a few vehicles around here that can scan for kethane, and as long as I'm getting the surface covered, we should be fine. Alright, back to the space station here, and here's the big rig. I'm just making sure it's got a full tank of fuel, and we're going to dispatch it to go rendezvous with the lunar platform. I really do like that truck cab from TT Modular Wheels. It is pretty sweet. I use it in a few vehicles. Alright, so just backing off here. This vehicle's, again, a general workhorse that I've designed to pull stuff, move stuff, all that kind of stuff. It's a truck in space. Just kind of general workhorse of my orbit, or my long-term space program. So I'm just going to let MechJeb take us into a rendezvous with my orbital platform here. We're going to just kind of speed ahead, because you don't need to see all these maneuvers. Alrighty, so we're coming in. It looks like a good approach. I'm looking at it going, man, that's coming in awful fast, and I'm just like, what the? Oh, jeez. This can't be good. Whoa! Dang it! Look for the solar panels. I swore it could have taken one, so we just kind of go through this again in slow-mo, and like, hot diggity damn, that was close. I couldn't believe it. I was like, that could have easily been the first major disaster of the long-term space program. I'm like, MechJeb definitely gave me a few white hairs for that one. Whew! So, give us a second here to let our hearts calm down a bit. Well, mine anyway. Mobas is enjoying that just a little too much, I think. Just a hair. The other two guys kind of realized how close they came to being stains in orbit. Anyway, so it looks like the rest of the maneuver is going to go off without a hitch here. I just got my close approach, and then I'm going to get my docking ports aligned, and we're going to give this thing gas. It's going to need the Delta V to get out to the moon. Big vehicles have a lot of mass to move, and therefore they need a lot of delta V. Rotating the kethane platform around here, just so that it's facing the rig. I'll switch to the rig next just to actually do the docking maneuvers. It's a little more nimble, a little easier to do it with. I decided this time I was going to have a little fun with it. Now, there we go, facing the rig. I come into the rig. I'm going to cut away here until I get a little closer to the actual docking, because you've seen me dock before. I decided to actually drive this one in from the cab of the truck, so I'm going to switch to the point of view of the cab in a moment. It's going to change my orientation a little bit because you're not actually controlling from the docking port, you're controlling from the cab. And if you remember from a previous video, controlling from the cab will actually cause the dock to try to mate right square between the two windows of the cab. Not so good. Here we go. I actually kind of really like this point of view. As you can see, just changing the docking port a little, changes the point of view, changes the where your control points, so you have to keep that in mind when you're doing the dock alignment. So we're just coming in carefully here. We're not even doing it that fast, and I took a look over, and they're panicking. I'm just like, really? Guys? Seriously? This is like the safest dock I've ever done. Anyway, crunch. There's some metal fatigue, and we're there. Awesome. So now I'm going to be beginning to move fuel around. I got a lot of little tanks to fill up, so we do those. It takes a few minutes. I just cut ahead of here a bit. Again, just finishing the last couple of tanks, making sure it's balanced. You got to make sure your fuel is balanced, or it's going to create problems for you later. And then we are going to decouple, and I'm going to get my kethane platform out to the moon next. The rig itself, once I'm done this, I'm going to send it back to the station for a refill, because it's going to be capturing the next part of the space station that's going out to the moon. We're going to launch that here right away. But first, we got to get that platform done. So just going to head out to the map node here. We're going to find a maneuver node that's going to take us to the moon. Alright, so we find it right about here. But I think I can do a little better. So I start playing with the node a bit and find a better approach. Trying to keep in mind that even though I've got plenty of delta V, I don't want to lose it unless I have to. Being efficient with your burns is just a good practice. Now we're just coming in here. I got her set up, nice equatorial capture, so I don't have to do a lot of expensive maneuvers later. Getting to the moon is quite easy. It's the easiest challenge in the game, I think. It took almost no time for me to do it once I figured out how to do it the first time. Getting out to the other planets and their respective satellites is going to be a lot more challenging. I'm going to be thinking on Duna and Eve. I can't remember which one comes up next, but I'm probably going to have to put together an entire ship excursion, convoy slash something. I'm debating on exactly how I'm going to do it and how much equipment I need to take out with me. Eve is going to be especially challenging. I'm really hoping I can find kethane on Gilly, and I can efficiently, or at least effectively, extract it and use it to power any other excursions there. Anyway, that's for the future. So we got my encounter, so I'm just setting the Kerbal alarm clock here to let me know when I've got a sphere of influence change, and I can just kind of let this thing finish its journey. We're gonna go back to the rig here to send it back to the space station. And again, I'm going to let MacJab do this simply because it speeds up my gameplay. I don't have to spend hours trying to capture or do my own orbits. Just kind of do it quickly and just go for it. Alright, so we made it. We did it. No problems. Didn't have any close encounters this time, thankfully. I don't need to impact something. But mind you, if I do hit something and it's spectacular, you will see it. Please don't root for me to hit things just because you want to see it. As I'm going to progress with this series here, I'm going to try to get away from just seeing all the maneuvers and stuff and just docking and procedures. I am starting to get to the point where I have a lot of missions rolling around here, so I can switch between them frequently. You're going to see more of the stuff that I think you want to see, or there's more of the stuff that I would want to see. Again, cutting a little bit of footage just away from the docking procedures, because it, again, speeds up these videos. I don't want them to get too much longer than a half an hour each, simply because I think I would lose interest from people. But if I can keep it, at least, entertaining enough so people keep coming back, maybe get some tips and tricks and whatnot, we'll go forward. And I'm going to keep mod. I love mods. Once you start, you can't stop. It's like a crack addiction. And we've got connection to the star base. I'm checking my fuel reserves here and moving fuel around, but I decided to start launching moon parts. Now this is the same can that goes on the space station right now around Kerbin. I'm going to haul it out to the moon to function, do basically the same job out there. So Mun and Kerbin stations will probably be pretty similar because I'm going to use the same parts for them. You've already seen this launch, so let's move forward. The only modification I've made to the can this time around is I've taken one solar sail off it. I felt 4 was overkill, so I've left it with 2, and that should be more than enough. Alright, so we're just going to finish our circularization of the gas can. From there, it's just going to stay in Kerbin's orbit for the short term here. Then we're going to launch the docking collar. From there, we can get the rig the big rig and the tug from the Kerbin space station to capture each piece and then haul them both out to the Mun. I decided to do this in 2 stages, so rather than assemble and pull it all as one piece, because I was worried that the docking ports might not handle it very well. When you're dealing with this much weight, it tends to get a little squirrely, a little wobbly. So I felt it was better to do each piece individually, even though it might cost a little bit more in fuel and a little bit more in time. We'll assemble the space station in the lunar orbit. From there I can start ferrying fuel up to it with my kethane rig. But before the platform can actually start delivering parts or delivering fuel to the moon, we're going to have to launch a couple more support vehicles. We'll get more into that a little bit later. As we get closer to the periaps here, I'm just going to use the RCS to bleed off a little bit of that extra orbit, get my apoapsy down to about 85 kilometers above Kerbin surface. I think that's where it'll stay until I come pick it up with the tug. Next we'll launch the docking port. But I've been debating in this series here, and some of you might have been aware of Scott Manley's videos where he did his long-term space program, and he was basically trying to do a very viable system. Now, I'm not going to do the reusable space program because I'm more than happy dropping stages and garbage back to the planet in the efforts of making bigger, more elaborate systems. But I was thinking about the crew transfers he was doing. He was trying to rotate crews in and out, and I was debating maybe they should do that too. So I've been working on an SSTO plane that I think I've got perfected. You won't see it in this video. I'll probably introduce it next video. Make some tests and see if I can launch it up to the space station and start maneuvering crew around and rotating them in and out. I'll see how viable it is. It might be a good way to kind of add a little bit more interest to this series as opposed to anything else. Getting back to the game at hand here comes the space dock again. I'm going to cut away a little bit of this just because you've seen it once before. It's the same part. It's pretty much standard at this point. Alrighty, up to the 85 kilometers of my apoaps. Just going to start circularizing here. I've got a little wee bit of fuel left in the tank that's on the back right now. So I'm just going to use that up first, and then I'll go to the inner stage to finish it off. As we go forward with this series, I'm going to spend less and less time watching me get stuff up into orbit, because it's pretty standard maneuvers. It's one of the first things you kind of have to figure out as a new Kerbal player. If you want tutorials, feel free to ask me. I'll be more than happy to help you out any way I can. When I start getting out to some of the more difficult places, Duna, Eve, Jewel, Moho, I'll probably do more in depth on how to actually make the transitions out there, or how I did it. I'd usually try to do things perfectly, but you never know. It doesn't always work out quite that way. You definitely got to pay attention to those launch windows, because otherwise you're going to be spending a lot of Delta V getting around. Well, we just finished the circularization of the space station here, this docking part of it anyway. And we'll take a quick look from inside the crew cab. As you can see, the landing can that is in is pretty tight. But they do got 2 crew cabs, and there's 2 landing cans, and we'll have 2 crew the space station at all times, so they're never alone. We'll get back onto the Mun here. Just going to quickly start processing some kethane. I got to fill this vehicle up. It's going to carry as much fuel as it can out into orbit to meet the lunar platform and the sky crane carrying it, because it's going to need a fair amount of fuel to land it. One of the things I can do in this game, which is kind of handy, is when I've got, such a small amount of time between various maneuvers or sphere of influence changes, I can spend that time just doing some of the things that I have to watch but don't really need to really do anything. So like for example, I'll be on a probe while it's scanning a planet, or I'll be on my kethane rig while it's harvesting kethane. I'll just time accelerate just to make sure those tasks are getting done. They need to be done in order to keep this operation running smoothly. Taking a look at the kethane platform here, I'm getting fairly close to a sphere of influence change, so I'm just going to cut ahead here in a moment to that change. Now we're sitting on it. I'm just going to have to set up a maneuver node to on the periapse here, just so that I can get an orbit around the Moon safely. Get her to about 25 kilometers off the Martian surface. I think that's fairly stable. It puts a nice safe place for me to meet up with it later with the kethane rig to give it some more juice and add that delta V that it needs to land. Give myself a 5-minute warning on the Kerbal alarm clock too, just so I have ample warning in case I need to rotate it around or something. So I'll just point the station at a retrograde here, just to make sure it's more or less facing the direction I need it to. I don't have to do a lot of tweaking when it gets there. And just close the docking shield. There we go. Alrighty then, so this is all set up. Gonna switch back to the kethane rig here. And I'm just gonna, as you can see, I've finished filling it. I'm just getting the last little bit of kethane that I need, and then Billy Bob there, who's been supervising the operation from an EVA, has got to get back on board. Now, having the lander can really close to the base of the ship is handy for this. I only need one ladder to get him up there. Quite warm with those nuclear engines humming around them, I'm sure. Now, basically, I'm just waiting here because I got to do another probe maneuver in a few minutes. So we're going to switch to that here in just a moment. So we're just going to switch to the Duna probe. This one's still on an orbit around Kerbin. I need to give it more velocity to get out of the sphere of influence. Get her out into the solar system and see if I can get this one and the Eve probe. The plan is to try to get them to Eve and Duna respectively before any manned missions. I don't know how successful I'll be, considering I'm going way ahead of their windows. I might be able to do it, I might not. If I lose the probes, no biggie. But if you don't try, you'll never know. You know, we'll see what happens and go from there. And we're out. We've got our escape. I just need to set it up in the alarm clock here to warn me. Taking a quick look at our Kerbal solar system around the sun there, and Duna's the red one, Eve's the purple one, Moho's the brown one in the center, closest to sun, and if you can see the green one out there, that's Jewel. And just kind of getting an idea of the orbit my probes will be on when they do finally exit the Kerbal system. Now I'm just going to switch the probe quickly and do some quick scanning while I wait for my next alarm to go off. On the platform here, now I just got her down so that it's in a stable orbit around the Moon, but I forgot to record it. I apologize. My bad. I screwed up. I just forgot to push the button. Setting up my last maneuver here just to get it into a circular orbit around Kerbin and 25 kilometers above the Moon's surface. Setting the alarm, and with that, I'm going to call it an episode. Please feel free to like or subscribe, leave a comment or a suggestion. I'm always interested. This is Scott Cook saying, see you in the verse. Have a good one. Bye.